Lorna Wexley was a name known only to a few outside the towering headquarters of HelixCore Solutions, a technology infrastructure firm nestled in the heart of Pittsburgh. But within its glass-paneled offices, she was a fixture, 62 years old, stoic, methodical, and ever reliable. For nearly 3 decades, she'd overseen compliance audits, flagged irregular expenditures, and trained new hires on regulatory protocols. Her entire adult life was interwoven with the company's rise. It was a rainy Friday in early May when Lorna was summoned to the 18th floor, a place she had rarely visited despite her long tenure. The elevators were quieter than usual, and the reception outside the executive suite had a strange tension. She straightened the collar of her burgundy blouse, trying to suppress the churn in her gut. "Ms. Wexley," said Mason Troy, the new chief operations officer, gesturing toward a sleek black chair opposite his desk. His voice was smooth, and unsettlingly relaxed. "You've been with us quite some time." 30 years and 11 months, Lorna replied, her tone measured. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Impressive. Truly." A tan envelope lay on his desk, perfectly aligned with the edge. Lorna noticed his hands never strayed far from it. "We're undergoing structural realignment," he began, "and after much consideration, we've determined that your role has become redundant." Lorna didn't blink. 3 days before my retirement date? He avoided eye contact. "These decisions are never easy." There was silence for a beat too long. "This package includes 3 months' severance," he continued, pushing the envelope toward her. "Standard terms. Sign and return it by Monday. HR will assist with your exit." The air in the room thickened. Lorna reached out slowly, took the envelope, but didn't open it. She stood. "Thank you," she said. Her voice held no emotion. Mason seemed almost disappointed. Maybe he had expected a meltdown, a protest, perhaps even a legal threat. But Lorna, after 31 years of navigating chaos cloaked in corporate language, knew better. She walked out of the office with even strides. Marlene from HR trailed her, offering half-whispered apologies as they passed curious glances in the open office. The goodbye was sterile. No farewell lunch, no cake. Just a gray cardboard box filled with personal items, a framed photo of her son Michael, a ceramic mug that read Queen of Compliance, and a 10-year service trophy. The walk to the car felt longer than usual. She drove home through the misty Pittsburgh streets, raindrops trailing down the windshield like tears she refused to shed. Her house sat quiet on the edge of the Allegheny River, a modest colonial she'd kept after her husband passed. She brewed tea, sat at her small kitchen table, and finally opened the envelope. The standard terms were insulting: 3 months' pay, a gag clause, and a full waiver of any claims against HelixCore. Her pension, fully vested in 3 days, wasn't mentioned. But this wasn't a careless oversight. This was a precision strike. Lorna's hand hovered above the paper, then moved to a drawer near the fridge. She pulled out a small key. In her study, behind a shelf of war novels, a locked steel case waited. It hadn't been opened in over a year. Inside were USB drives, copies of internal emails, audit logs, meeting transcripts, and a decade's worth of records documenting quietly ignored violations. Data had been massaged. Numbers fudged. Contracts approved without oversight. And she had flagged them all, only to be buried under strategic prioritization or executive discretion. Mason Troy's arrival 6 months ago had accelerated the rot. He was slick, untouchable, and disturbingly focused on short-term gains. He had changed the culture overnight, where caution once ruled, now speed trumped safety. Lorna hadn't been surprised. She had quietly collected everything. Not out of spite, but out of habit. Out of duty. Out of principle. That night, she lit a single candle and sat in silence, letting the storm pass outside. She knew exactly what she needed to do. She retrieved a business card from her filing cabinet. Ethan Rowe, now Director of Corporate Oversight at the Federal Regulatory Council. They'd worked together years ago during a collaborative audit. She dialed his number. "Ethan? It's Lorna Wexley. I think it's time we had that conversation we joked about years ago." His voice on the other end was calm, but alert. "Tell me everything." Over the next 2 hours, she did. By the end, Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "Lorna, what you've got isn't just grounds for wrongful termination. It's evidence of systemic fraud. HelixCore could be in serious trouble." "They already are," she replied. "They just don't know it yet." He instructed her on next steps: document everything, secure copies off-site, and prepare a timeline. He would initiate formal review proceedings that Monday. She would be protected under whistleblower statutes. When she hung up, Lorna didn't feel triumphant. She felt cold. Exposing HelixCore wasn't something she relished. But they had chosen this path the moment they decided to discard her like an obsolete file folder. That weekend, she copied documents, labeled evidence, and prepared binders so organized they could have passed military inspection. Each email, each discrepancy was matched with annotations. 3 copies, one for the authorities, one for herself, and one hidden with a friend. By Sunday night, her phone had rung 5 times. 3 were from Mason. 2 from HR. She didn't answer. At 9 p.m., a black sedan pulled into her driveway. She didn't move from the window as Mason walked up and slipped an envelope into her mailbox. No knock. No call. Just desperation. She retrieved it after he drove off. A second copy of the agreement. A note scribbled on HelixCore letterhead. Final offer. Sign before Monday 9 a.m. and avoid further complications. Lorna folded the paper neatly and placed it back in the envelope. Then she tucked it into her fireplace and lit a match. The flame roared to life. Justice, it seemed, had already begun to smolder. Monday morning arrived with a hush of anticipation and a weight of finality. The sun rose over Pittsburgh's hills, casting a pale gold light across Lorna Wexley's study as she carefully zipped shut the worn leather briefcase that now carried her 30 years of truth. She wore a deep navy suit, her war armor, as she jokingly called it back in the early days of presenting to finance boards. But today was different. This wasn't a budget meeting or a compliance update. This was a reckoning. The Federal Regulatory Council's regional office stood like a fortress of glass and steel along the downtown corridor. Lorna arrived 15 minutes early, parking in the visitor's garage and walking briskly through the automatic doors. Ethan Rowe met her in the lobby, his sandy hair more gray than she remembered, but the same sharp eyes and quick handshake she trusted all those years ago. "Lorna," he said, his voice warm but businesslike, "ready?" "As I'll ever be." He led her to a quiet conference room on the 6th floor. 2 other officials waited, Camilla Duarte, an investigator known for cracking open one of the East Coast's largest pension fraud cases, and Marcus Lane, a forensic accountant with a reputation for turning numbers into confessions. Camilla opened a leather-bound folder and smiled reassuringly. "This is an informal session to start. Just walk us through what you have. We'll take it from there." And so Lorna began. She spoke for nearly 4 hours. Through page after page, document after document, she painted a picture of a company that had slowly twisted ethics into efficiency, oversight into optics. She described the early flags, misaligned vendor records, mysteriously vanishing audit trails, and the more sinister developments after Mason Troy's arrival. There was a shift, she said, pointing to a color-coded spreadsheet. After his first quarter, reports began to arrive laden with gaps. Expense forecasts were smoothed too perfectly. By Q3, the compliance team stopped getting access to certain financial dashboards entirely. "My permissions were revoked without explanation," Marcus interjected. "And this chart here, this trend of overstated revenue, this was based on your own projections versus the published figures?" "Yes," Lorna said. "I reconstructed them using archival logs and shipping manifests. The discrepancies began slowly, under 2%, but by last year, they were inflating quarterly growth by nearly 18%. Camilla's brow furrowed. "And all this was reported internally?" "Repeatedly." Lorna slid a stack of printed emails toward her. "These are the messages I sent. The red tabs indicate responses, or the lack thereof. You'll see that once Mason arrived, most of my reports were rerouted or outright ignored. He also restructured the compliance reporting chain so that I reported directly to him." "And you were fired, sorry, let go, just days before your pension vested?" Ethan asked gently. 3 days, Lorna replied. The exact window required for forfeiture under the company's current policy. Silence filled the room for a moment. Then Marcus gave a low whistle. "This is more than fraud. This is systemic." Camilla nodded. "And retaliatory." By noon, Lorna was exhausted. She had relived the slow unraveling of her career in minute detail. But she also felt something she hadn't felt in weeks: clarity. Her story was out. It had form. It had witnesses. As she left the building, Ethan walked her to her car. "This isn't over, not by a long shot," he said. "But you did the hard part. We'll take it from here. Just be ready." Lorna smiled faintly. I've been ready for years. I just hoped it wouldn't come to this. That night, she received a call from someone she hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade, Daniel Brent, a former internal auditor who'd left HelixCore under vague circumstances. Lorna, he said without preamble, I saw your name mentioned in an internal memo. It's starting, isn't it? It is, she confirmed. Good. Listen, I left the company because I found something big. But I wasn't brave enough to push back. I've regretted it ever since. If you need corroboration, I have backup files. You still have them? I do. They're yours if you want them. The following morning, Daniel emailed a 400-page PDF file titled Archive_X42. Within it were scans of procurement records, emails showing pressure to adjust risk ratings, and financial flowcharts inconsistent with official disclosures. Lorna forwarded the entire file to Ethan with a note, "It's worse than we thought." Meanwhile, HelixCore was beginning to stir. By midweek, rumors had spread through the building like wildfire. Mason's office door remained closed all day. HR reps held emergency sessions with department heads. And employees noticed that the usually aloof general counsel was suddenly very, very present. Thursday evening, a business news outlet broke the story. Federal investigation targets HelixCore compliance irregularities, insider source cites pension retaliation. Though unnamed, Lorna's identity wasn't hard to guess. By Friday morning, her phone was ringing nonstop. Reporters, colleagues, HR, and finally, Mason. She let every call go to voicemail, until a message came from a familiar voice. Lorna, this is Claire Marchand from the board. We need to talk. Please. We believe there may have been a serious error in judgment. Error? Lorna nearly laughed. That's what they were calling it? Still, the message marked a turning point. That evening, a courier arrived at her door with a formal letter. HelixCore was suspending her termination, reinstating her salary retroactively, and offering a meeting with the board to clarify all circumstances surrounding her recent dismissal. She called Ethan immediately. They're trying to bury this, she said. Let them try, he replied. We're moving forward with a subpoena. And Lorna? We're assigning protection status under whistleblower enforcement. You're no longer alone in this. But Lorna already knew she wasn't alone. When she logged into her email the next day, she had a message from 6 former HelixCore employees. Each one said the same thing. I stayed quiet. But I'm ready to speak. By the time Monday dawned over the rust-colored rooftops of Pittsburgh, the gears of justice were already grinding louder than ever. The media frenzy had escalated over the weekend. National outlets picked up the story, citing unnamed whistleblower sources who claimed years of data tampering and illegal executive bonuses at HelixCore. Lorna Wexley, the woman once barely acknowledged in board meetings, now found herself labeled in headlines as the quiet conscience of compliance. But Lorna wasn't distracted by the buzz. She was too focused on what lay ahead. Her day began at a downtown law office, where she met with her newly retained counsel, Virginia Lowell. A tough, sharp attorney known for whistleblower litigation, Virginia had agreed to represent Lorna pro bono until a settlement or federal reward was secured. HelixCore will come at you in waves, Virginia said as she reviewed documents, her glasses perched at the tip of her nose. First with charm. Then with threats. Then with offers. It's all designed to contain you. But we don't bend. Not now. I'm not here to play games, Lorna said. They gambled with their books, but now the numbers are going to speak. That afternoon, Virginia accompanied her to HelixCore's headquarters, an invitation that had been extended under the guise of open dialogue. But Lorna wasn't naive. This wasn't about clarity or transparency. It was damage control. Security, who just days before had escorted her out, now opened the door with robotic politeness. Inside, the same marble-tiled lobby felt like a hollow cathedral. Employees whispered in corners. Lorna could feel their stares trail her down the corridor. The meeting took place in a sterile boardroom with muted gray walls and a long mahogany table. Half a dozen board members sat at one end, and at the head of the table, Claire Marchand, interim chairwoman, flanked by HelixCore's general counsel and an outside crisis management consultant. Ms. Wexley, Claire began with rehearsed formality. We'd like to begin by sincerely apologizing for the oversight surrounding your recent termination. Oversight? Virginia interjected. 3 days before her pension vested is not an oversight. It's tactical retaliation. Let's not insult each other with euphemisms. Claire stiffened. We're here in good faith. Virginia slid a copy of the Federal Regulatory Council's subpoena across the table. Then you won't mind cooperating fully. Lorna watched their faces. Masks cracked in real time. Some looked panicked. One, Martin Glasser, the chief financial strategist, visibly paled. We're prepared to reinstate Ms. Wexley with full benefits, effective retroactively, Claire offered. Additionally, we'd like to invite her to consult on rebuilding our internal control structure. And what about the manipulated revenue reports? Lorna asked calmly. The altered risk assessments? The compliance logs deleted under Mason Troy's directive? No one answered. Virginia leaned forward. Let's be clear. Ms. Wexley isn't interested in corporate theater. She's cooperating with a federal investigation. If HelixCore has any hope of mitigating the fallout, transparency isn't optional, it's overdue. The meeting ended not with agreement, but with uncomfortable silence. As Lorna and Virginia exited the building, a low rumble of distant thunder echoed through the sky. Spring storms were coming, and not just the weather kind. That evening, HelixCore's public relations office released a carefully worded statement announcing an internal compliance review and an unexpected administrative error regarding a long-standing employee. The attempt to downplay the whistleblower narrative only fueled public speculation. The next morning, Lorna returned to the Federal Regulatory Council's office for a second meeting, this time with a larger team of investigators, forensic specialists, and legal advisors. Ethan Rowe greeted her with a weary but respectful nod. We've subpoenaed 4 more departments, he told her. And your backup files, Daniel Brent's archive, opened doors we didn't know existed. By midweek, the FRC had frozen HelixCore's stock trading temporarily and issued a formal alert to major stakeholders. Shareholders panicked. The company's value dropped by 19% in one day. More importantly, internal pressure began to mount. 4 former compliance officers contacted the FRC independently to confirm Lorna's claims. 2 even submitted their own evidence, recordings of closed-door meetings where senior executives pressured teams to meet targets by reclassifying liabilities as deferred revenue. HelixCore was no longer dealing with a single whistleblower. It was facing a full-scale revolt from within. And then, the storm broke open completely. On Friday, HelixCore's offices were raided under federal warrant. Dozens of agents entered with laptops, scanners, and boxes marked evidence. Mason Troy, who had remained behind closed doors for the past week, was escorted out in full view of the press by agents in Navy windbreakers. The images went viral in minutes. Inside the boardroom where Lorna once had to ask twice to be heard, panicked executives now spoke in hushed, desperate tones. The general counsel resigned that afternoon. The head of investor relations followed the next morning. Claire Marchand called Virginia directly. We need to meet again. Please. There's information we'd like to share, confidentially. Virginia laughed. Now you want to talk? Please. We're trying to protect what's left. But it was too late. The truth was no longer contained. That weekend, Lorna sat in her quiet kitchen once more, this time with a cup of strong black coffee and an inbox filled with news alerts. National outlets now ran headlines about her role. Pension retaliation leads to uncovering decade-long corporate deception. Her son Michael called from Austin. Mom, he said, I've never been prouder of you. You didn't just stand up, you stood alone. I didn't, not really, she replied. A lot of people were watching. They were just waiting for someone to light the fuse. As the rain began to patter against her window again, Lorna realized that the storm hadn't broken her. It had revealed her. And more than that, it had awakened others. By the start of the following week, HelixCore Solutions wasn't just under scrutiny, it was under siege. Lorna Wexley stood at the edge of something far greater than she had imagined. What began as a quiet termination had exploded into a national corporate scandal. The headlines were relentless. Whistleblower exposes decade of fraud at tech giant. HelixCore COO arrested in federal sweep. Compliance officer's termination sparks $400 million audit freeze. The Federal Regulatory Council had confirmed to the press that Lorna's documentation played a pivotal role in launching a federal probe. And in every article, every news segment, her name was mentioned with reverence, though often accompanied by phrases like unassuming, methodical, or a quiet force. But Lorna wasn't caught up in the media storm. She was busy. With Virginia at her side, she spent each day assisting FRC investigators and preparing statements for a congressional ethics panel that had taken sudden interest in HelixCore's case. Her living room, once neat and sparsely decorated, now resembled a war room: folders, USB drives, labeled boxes, and legal pads filled with notes. The scent of strong coffee and printer ink clung to the air. "Have you seen this?" Virginia asked one morning, holding up a printout of a major business magazine. Lorna took it and scanned the headline: "Executive Scapegoating or Systemic Collapse?" The article painted a more sinister picture than expected. It suggested that the fraud predated Mason Troy, implicating multiple previous executives and board members. It even hinted that HelixCore's rise in stock value over the past decade may have been built, at least partially, on falsified growth metrics. "They're right," Lorna said quietly. "It didn't start with Mason. He just poured gasoline on a fire already burning." That same day, the FRC discovered 2 offshore accounts connected to HelixCore's former CFO. Millions had been funneled through shell vendors for strategic consulting, none of which had ever appeared on official expense sheets. As the scope of the investigation widened, more executives jumped ship. 3 board members resigned within 48 hours. Others went silent, declining to comment to the press. But the backlash wasn't just internal. Shareholders filed a class action lawsuit against the company, citing intentional misrepresentation of value. 2 pension funds divested completely, while several Fortune 500 clients suspended contracts, pending the outcome of the investigation. HelixCore's market value plummeted by nearly 40% in a single week. Still, Lorna remained composed. The chaos didn't shake her. If anything, it validated every quiet moment she had spent organizing files, every ignored report she had written, every meeting where her warnings were dismissed. And yet, the emotional cost was steep. Late one evening, as she sifted through old audit files, her daughter-in-law sent a video link. It was a segment from a talk show, where a media consultant criticized Lorna's motivations. "She's just bitter," the commentator said. "Probably angry she didn't get promoted. It's retaliation. Don't be fooled, this isn't courage, it's career revenge." Lorna stared at the screen. The words hit harder than she expected. Not because they were true, they weren't. But because they mirrored the same dismissiveness she'd faced for years, the belief that a quiet woman in the background couldn't possibly be the catalyst for accountability. She took a walk along the river that night. The spring wind bit at her coat, but it cleared her mind. She thought about the years she'd spent meticulously doing her job while others took shortcuts. She remembered her husband's encouragement, her son's faith, her younger self who once believed that the system worked if you followed the rules. Now, she was proof that sometimes it didn't. But also, that you didn't need to burn it all down to change it, you just had to shine a bright enough light. The following morning, the real reckoning began. HelixCore issued a press release confirming that it had received an official enforcement notice from the Federal Regulatory Council. The company admitted to multiple years of inaccurate reporting and failure of oversight at the executive level. The document was carefully worded, avoiding direct admissions of guilt, but its implications were clear. Virginia received a call from the new interim CEO, Elaine Sutter, a respected operations executive brought in from outside. "She wants to meet," Virginia told Lorna. "Privately." Lorna hesitated. "Why?" "She says she's not here to defend the past. She wants to discuss the future." The meeting was arranged at Virginia's office later that week. Elaine Sutter arrived on time, dressed simply, with a worn leather folder tucked under one arm. She offered Lorna a firm handshake. "I'll be honest, Ms. Wexley," she said, "this company owes you more than an apology. It owes you a course correction." Elaine placed the folder on the table and slid it over. Inside was a proposal, a formal settlement package, including full reinstatement retroactive to the date of termination, lifetime health coverage and pension with early vesting, a 7-figure compensation award acknowledging emotional distress and damages, a consulting role as lead ethics advisor, should Lorna wish to return in a non-operational capacity. But what surprised Lorna most was the final page, an official letter of apology from the board, signed unanimously. Elaine looked her in the eyes. "We don't expect you to come back. But we want to show you, and the world, that doing the right thing matters here again." Lorna nodded slowly, then closed the folder. "I'm not making any decisions today," she said. "Not about the money. Not about the role." "Understood. But I'll tell you this," Lorna added, voice calm but firm. "This isn't redemption. Not yet. It's a first step. Elaine nodded with quiet respect. That's more than fair. That night, Lorna spoke with Ethan from the FRC over the phone. HelixCore's culture isn't just broken, he said. It was programmed that way. But your case? It's already changing things. We've received a dozen new tips from whistleblowers at other firms. Lorna didn't respond right away. Do you realize what you've done, Lorna? Ethan continued. You started a chain reaction. She smiled faintly. I didn't start anything, Ethan. I just refused to ignore it. As news of the internal cleanup at HelixCore spread, public sentiment shifted again. For every commentator casting doubt, there were now dozens of voices rallying in support of what she stood for. She received letters from young women in finance, compliance officers who had once felt powerless, and even a retired judge who wrote, "Your courage reminded me of why I entered public service in the first place." But the greatest validation came quietly, from her son, Michael, in a simple text message. You didn't just protect your pension, Mom. You protected truth. And as she looked around her modest, paperwork-strewn home, Lorna realized something powerful. This wasn't a story about one woman's revenge. It was a story about a system being forced, finally, to listen. 6 months had passed since Lorna Wexley walked out of HelixCore Solutions with a cardboard box and a storm brewing quietly behind her. What followed had unraveled the very fabric of a corporate giant, and shifted the way an entire industry thought about ethics, compliance, and the unseen people who upheld them. Now, sitting in the back row of a federal courtroom in Washington, D.C., Lorna wore a simple navy blazer and a quiet, composed expression. At the front of the room stood Mason Troy and 3 former HelixCore executives, their legal teams flanking them like tired bodyguards. Each man, once towering behind polished desks and 6-figure salaries, now looked deflated in their gray suits, necks stiff and hands clasped tightly. Guilty pleas. Not whispered inside rooms or buried in sealed documents, but announced aloud, in open court, under the eyes of press, regulators, and a new generation of compliance officers watching the proceedings unfold by a live stream. Lorna didn't smile. She didn't need to. This wasn't revenge. This was accountability finally, painfully, beginning to take root. When Mason turned slightly as he was led out of the courtroom, their eyes met for a brief moment. His stare was blank, not angry, not apologetic, just the hollow look of a man finally realizing the weight of his own arrogance. Not toward Lorna specifically, but toward what she represented, a truth that could no longer be buried. As the courtroom emptied, reporters gathered by the steps, but Lorna declined interviews. She wasn't there for headlines. Her role in the story was done, for now. The settlement awarded to her by the Federal Regulatory Council had been generous. Between the whistleblower compensation, her reinstated pension, and the out-of-court damages negotiated by Virginia, Lorna now had more financial security than she'd ever expected. But she wasn't one to hoard wealth. She used part of the settlement to establish a scholarship fund in her late husband's name, the Nathan Wexley Ethics Fellowship. It was awarded annually to graduate students pursuing degrees in regulatory compliance, public oversight, or business ethics. The first recipient was a young woman from Detroit, who wrote in her application, "I want to be someone who speaks up, not someone who walks away." Lorna had cried reading that. The kind of quiet, grateful tears that came from knowing her suffering had birthed something meaningful. She bought a small home beside a lake just north of the city, a place of still water, quiet mornings, and wood ducks that waddled past her porch. Her son, Michael, moved back to Pittsburgh with his wife and 2 children. They spent weekends together now, baking pies, assembling puzzles, and walking wooded trails she never had time to visit during her 70-hour workweeks. One afternoon, while coloring with her 6-year-old granddaughter, the girl looked up and asked, "Grandma, what's a whistleblower?" Lorna paused. Then smiled. "It's someone who tells the truth when everyone else is pretending not to hear it." The little girl blinked. "Like a superhero?" "Something like that," Lorna said. "But without a cape." Meanwhile, HelixCore was undergoing its most radical transformation in history. Under interim CEO Elaine Sutter, the company dismantled entire departments, terminated questionable vendor contracts, and introduced independent oversight into all executive financial reviews. A new position, Chief Integrity Officer, was created, and reporting structures were redesigned to protect employees who flagged issues. HelixCore's quarterly earnings dropped sharply, but the company survived. Barely. And they sent Lorna their new annual report, certified and transparent, filled with footnotes and new controls. She read it carefully, with the professional thoroughness she'd never lost. They didn't ask her to return. But they did list her name, in a footnote under Organizational Integrity Reform, as a key source of accountability. It wasn't the kind of recognition that got framed on office walls. But it was honest. Virginia eventually moved on to another case, one involving a private hospital network and fraudulent insurance claims. Before she left Pittsburgh, she took Lorna out for tea. "They're still scared of you," she said with a grin. "No," Lorna replied, stirring her cup gently. "They're scared of what happens when people stop staying quiet. Same difference." As they parted, Virginia gave her one last piece of advice. "You have a voice now, Lorna. Bigger than a boardroom. Use it." And she did. She began speaking at universities and regulatory conferences. Not for fame or paychecks, but because people needed to hear what she had to say. She spoke not as a victim or a hero, but as a veteran of the long war between silence and conscience. She told stories of quiet rooms, buried reports, and the importance of paying attention when no one else is. Over time, her lectures became standing-room-only events. Young professionals lined up afterward, clutching notebooks, eyes wide. "I didn't think we mattered," one student said. "Your story changed that." One day, nearly a year to the day of her termination, Lorna sat beside the lake as geese flew overhead and the sunset painted the water gold. Her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan Rowe. "New tip just came in. Another compliance officer. Says she was inspired by what you did. We'll follow up." Lorna smiled. She didn't respond immediately. She simply looked out across the still water and let herself feel something that had eluded her for decades, not pride, not vindication, but peace. For years, she had been unheard, undervalued, and unseen. But now, others were listening. And not just to her. To truth. To decency. To the quiet power of doing what is right, even when no one's watching, or especially when they are. In a world that measured worth by titles, corner offices, and stock prices, Lorna Wexley had reminded everyone of something essential. Integrity doesn't make the loudest noise. It just lasts the longest. And in the echoes of a life spent watching carefully, documenting quietly, and standing firm when it counted most, she had left behind not a legacy of scandal, but a legacy of courage.